and welcome to Talking Royals, your weekly podcast from ITV. And Talking Royals this week is in a very different location. Some of the same personnel. I'm here. I'm Chris Shipp, ITV's Royal Editor. Lizzie's here. You are?
Lizzie Robinson, ITV's Royal Producer.
We're missing Charlene White, who couldn't make the journey down under with us, but we are talking to you from Sydney Harbour. I can think of many worse places to be.
Yeah, Talking Royals is on the road. We are in the shadow of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and behind us is the Sydney Opera House. So a pretty lovely place to be recording.
Yeah, and actually we should say, if you watched any of our reports this week, you'll see that actually we spent a little bit of time at the very, very top of Sydney Harbour Bridge.
We did, walked, 1,300 steps to the top. It is the most incredible view on a clear day out across Sydney Harbour and wider Sydney. It was very impressive.
Talking of clear days, today's not really one of them. I was promised some really, really amazing weather in Sydney, and I have to say it's been a bit of a disappointment. Apart from yesterday, It's been a bit of a disappointment.
It is much more sort of like home.
Yeah, a bit grey and a bit wet.
Yeah, a bit grey and a bit wet.
We had rain this morning. We were doing, this is what we're trying to, obviously, teach you to suck eggs here, but obviously, because we are where we are and our news is where our news is, we were doing news at 10 this morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, Sydney time, of course. It takes a lot of getting used to, doesn't it?
How's the jet lag?
Yeah, it's being better, getting there. So look, what do you think? Where do you think Australia is right now in the terms of welcoming their head of state? First time that Prince Charles as he was when he last came here, but King Charles when he lands here tonight.
Yeah, so to start off with, it's a significant moment, isn't it, for Charles? He is visiting Australia as their head of state, as King of Australia, and it is the first realm that he will have visited since he became monarch. So this is a really important moment for him.
Probably worth us saying, so yes, this is his first realm, but he has been to a Commonwealth country before. He just hasn't been to a Commonwealth realm. Do the explanation.
So the Commonwealth is 56 nations make up the Commonwealth. The King is head of the Commonwealth, but then he is also head of Commonwealth Realms, of which there are 14, plus the United Kingdom, where he is also king of all those countries.
Yes, and it still strikes me as a bit odd when he is the king of Australia, he's the king of Canada, he's the king of Antigua, for example, but and this is the first realm that he's been to. So I just get the impression that Australians are quite indifferent to it, whereas there has been a referendum before in 1999, where Australians voted to stay with the status quo. But the government here, the Labour government and the Labour Prime Minister, who are committed Republicans, don't really seem to have an appetite for another referendum.
Yeah, I think it's obviously a moment to begin this discussion again. He's arriving here, so people are talking about it, asking the question. There has been some polling out this week, but the polls, the Australian Republican movement, their polls suggest that 40% of Australians don't realise Charles is head of state, and they also say 60% of Australians say they prefer an Australian head of state. However, other polls...
I mean, when you think about that, it's quite high, and it might depend how you ask the question, isn't it? Like, would you prefer to have, as opposed to, do you want a referendum?
Yeah.
And they say so almost 2/3 would prefer to have an Australian head of state who's elected in some form or other. But 40% don't even know that King Charles is their head of state.
Yeah, but other polling, so the Daily Telegraph in Australia reported that 1/3 of Australians believe the country should become a republic, and 45% are in favour of it remaining a monarchy.
Do you know what I found interesting about that poll was that, the Telegraph were reporting that, the Telegraph here, that is actually a stronger showing for the monarchy than when Queen Elizabeth was alive. Now, that kind of defies the expectation that after her passing, that the popularity of the monarchy would nosedive here, because how can King Charles ever be as popular as his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth? But that poll, if it's correct, would appear to suggest otherwise.
Yeah, another one said that 26% like Charles more since he became king. So... there are polls on both sides.
And I think there's an element of sympathy here. I think people are welcoming here with that element of sympathy that here is a king travelling to the other side of the world, and he's got cancer, and yet he's determined still to come, when he could quite easily and understandably have said, actually, I've got to focus on my cancer treatment. I'm going to postpone this for a little while.
Yeah, and everyone we have spoken to has told us that the king really, did want to make the journey, and it is a very long journey for him to be here. And these tours, the tour reflects the fact that he is undergoing treatment for cancer and that he still has cancer, but it is still quite a busy schedule for him, a man that is about to turn 76 and has cancer.
Yeah. So the schedule is roughly, he lands at Sydney Airport. Our understanding is, this is fairly interesting if you're interested in these kind of things, that Queen Camilla's been on a break. We don't know where, the people have guessed, but we're not going to say. And then she's going to meet up with the king in Singapore, or has met up with him. And the king flew to Singapore commercially. And then they fly together on an Australian military or state aircraft for the arrival in Sydney.
Yeah, and that will be in a few hours our time, 10:30 a.m. in the UK. They will touch down on a historic visit here. And
whatever way you look at it, it is historic, because his first visit as king. It's also the second monarch ever to have visited Australia.
This is fascinating, and I hadn't really clocked that until last week, because Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen Elizabeth, was the first
and came here quite often
monarch to visit. So he's the first king and only the second monarch to visit.
And no
here.
king has ever been before. So no. George VI, George V, Edward VII, none of them came here. So
we were looking back at some archive yesterday, weren't we, of when Queen Elizabeth made that first trip as queen in 1954.
So she came actually into Sydney Harbour, where we are, on SS Gotha, wasn't it? And it's estimated Sydney's population at the time was something like 2 million, and 1 million of those people turned up to see her here. And the harbour was absolutely, you couldn't see the water because there were so many boats in the harbour.
Yeah, lots of people we've spoken to sort of out and about in Sydney have said even whatever side of the fence they fall, whether they agree with it or don't agree with it, they're still excited about the fact that the King and Queen are coming. And I think for a lot of people, they have, bigger issues to worry about than whether the King is head of state. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I've done a few chats with Australian breakfast TV here for Channel 7, Channel 9 and others. And actually, the big talking point here this week has been about the Australian Prime Minister buying a very expensive, £2 million property up the coast somewhere. And is that a bit tone deaf when it's there's a housing crisis? And the issue of royals, referendum, monarchy, constitutional change, becoming a republic, having an elected head of state, people are a bit meh. Probably. If I was rebuilding Australia from the bottom up, I probably wouldn't choose to have a head of state who lived in London. But no one seems massively bothered by it.
Do people care enough to do anything about it? It feels like, just out talking to people, it's not top of their agenda.
And the Labour government here lost a referendum last year on Indigenous rights, and they now seem to want to push the whole issue of referenda into the long grass, and they've got no appetite for this. In fact, have a listen to this interview that we did with Prue Carr. She is the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, so that's the state level government, and she's a Labour politician, a Republican. What did she say about the whole issue of getting rid of King Charles? Well, have a listen.
I think people are excited to welcome the King and Queen. We're excited to show our city and our state off, and we're excited that we have been chosen to have a monarch visit us for the first time in a very, very long time. There's no one in Australia that's ever seen a king, and we're genuinely looking forward, even the Republicans amongst us. And as a Labor government, we're Republicans, but we're also looking forward to welcoming the King and Queen. Why wouldn't we want to show off our beautiful city?
So that was the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, and that kind of sums up. She said, we are Republicans, we don't really want the King, but I'm going to host him, and we're happy to have him, and we don't really want a referendum, and we got lots of other things to do.
Yeah, and that is pretty much, people we've spoken to, that is pretty much the feeling that we've had with those that don't agree with having the King as head of state.
Talking of the premiers, though, so Sukar's boss is the Premier of New South Wales. He is one of 6 premiers of states and territories that are not going to this meeting, this reception that King Charles has put on for them in Canberra. Now look, the New South Wales guy can say, well, I'm already hosting him on Friday when he gets to the airport. I'm seeing him on Sunday. We've got a big event here in the harbour on Tuesday. But as for all the others, feels like they're making a bit of a point, doesn't it?
I mean, the headline, when you sort of read it, it certainly makes it feel like they're making a point. But, you know, when we spoke to Prue Carr yesterday about why, you know, she said, you know, they've all got their own reasons, and
Yeah,
she didn't
some have got
know,
elections. Yeah,
know why.
but and like, again, but so let's see on Monday. But it looks like that at least that's their way of making a bit of a point that we've got a lot of stuff we want to get on with in our own states. We're not going to make our way all the way over to Canberra to see the King. Now, that said, there is a group here called the Australian Republic Movement who definitely want, as the name would suggest, who want to replace the King. And they've launched a new campaign this week called the Farewell to Oz Tour. In other words, they hope this will be the last ever time that a British king or an Australian head of state who lives in Britain will come to Australia in this way.
Yeah, and the group wrote to the King, to Buckingham Palace, and they received a letter back, didn't they? Basically saying, you know, I have a lot of, it was written not by the King, but by one of his team, and basically saying that the King has a lot of love and affection for Australia, but it is for the Australians to decide their future, not for him to decide.
I think it was put to me by a senior aide to King Charles that what do you think he's going to do if Australia's vote to have an elected head of state? Is the King going to go against the wishes of a democratic mandate? Of course he isn't. So it is a matter for Australians to decide. But I thought that letter was quite interesting in the way in which it was phrased. The King has noted your points. In other words, they wrote to him about why they think Australia is time to move on. Now, we spoke to some people yesterday, and fun enough, you walk around this town, don't you? And what did we see? Well, one street was called...
We had Elizabeth Street,
King Street,
Prince Albert
Drive. There was a Victoria statue. There was, you know, obviously there are links to the colonial past here, but before all the various colonies were federated.
And the boat behind us?
The boat behind us, right, that you probably can't see it, but there's a big, it's not a boat, I think it's a ship.
A ship.
Has to be said. It's a cruise liner even, called the Queen Elizabeth. So actually she's docked in Sydney Harbour at the moment. But we had a chat with a couple of people. You know, I think younger generation, you listen to this example, I think they would probably more in favour of having an elected head of state. Then we met this older couple, as you will see, who had opposing views. Husband born in Britain, thinks Australia should be a republic. Wife born in Australia and wants to stay as a constitutional monarchy. Is it time to have an elected head of state?
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. I also think that the older generation maybe has a stronger connection, and also English families, maybe a stronger connection to the monarchy and the British Empire.
Because I just see so much conflict overseas that we don't want to go that way. And I think in one way our ties to Great Britain are worthwhile.
I just think that we've grown up, and we're like many countries in the Commonwealth, we're moving in that direction, and that doesn't mean that we're alienated against the UK or the monarchy itself. I just don't think we need it. That's all.
It's just time to move on.
Time to grow up.
Whereas I don't think that. Probably because all my...
It's not harmony in your household, is it, on this matter?
No, it is. I can agree with that attitude. But I'm very happy to keep the ties with Britain, even though I'm fifth generation. I'm very Australian.
So then a quick look ahead then. So when they arrive tonight, that beautiful building behind us, again, if you're watching this on ITVX, you'll be able to see it. But if you're listening to a podcast, we've got the Sydney Opera House behind us and those fantastic sails that are recognisable all over the world. They will have images of Prince Charles's visits to Australia projected over it at night time tonight. That will look pretty spectacular.
Yeah, previous visits. We've just been doing the maths, haven't we? So he has had 16 previous visits to Australia. This will be his 17th, and it will be the Queen's 4th.
Yes, so he of course he's been here many times before, but this is key because it's the first time a king's ever been to Australia and the first time he's coming as head of state. So
Programme will then.
Well, there's this rest day, which is important to talk about this rest day because of the cancer diagnosis. All the Australian media want to talk about is he going to go to the races? There's a big race here called the Everest tomorrow. Every time I've been on Australian TV this week, they said, is the King going to go to the races? The answer is
no.
No.
But it would have also been I think it would have looked really odd actually for him to step foot off a plane tonight and have what's billed as a rest day, which, of course,
Everyone will thinks he should have because he's got cancer.
and the schedule reflects the fact that that he has cancer. But for him then to use that rest day and for his first sort of big appearance in Australia to be at the races, I think it would have looked strange.
Well, I think Buckingham Palace would have felt a bit uncomfortable about it, but I have to say, talking to quite a few Australians, they would have loved the fact he went to the races. I don't think they would have minded one little bit. So Saturday rest day, Sunday there's a couple of events in Sydney.
Yeah.
Monday Canberra.
Yeah.
My speech to Parliament House there, and then Tuesday is, there's going to be a review of the fleet here in Sydney Harbour. They're going to meet people over at the Opera House there. So if you are watching this from Australia or listening to Australia, that's where you need to be on Tuesday. By the way, if you live in the UK, it's quite a long way to come over, but you're more than welcome. We'd love to see you.
And actually, I think, if times have been different, this, Sydney and Canberra, they've contained it, haven't they?
Yes.
To their two locations.
It would have been in Brisbane or Gold Coast or
been
Melbourne or Adelaide or, across to Perth, so.
And then next week, on Wednesday, we head to Samoa.
Yes, for the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit. So we're going to update the podcast once Australia's underway, and so we'll do an additional extra episode for you, bonus episode. Can't promise such a nice backdrop, but let's see what we can do. And that will be before another scheduled recording next Thursday. So thank you very much for listening, for watching, however you're receiving this podcast. You can, of course, get a back catalogue of royal podcasts. Talking Royals is available wherever you get your podcasts from. But from me and Lizzie on this slightly cold stone bench in Sydney Harbour. Speak to you next time.